Welcome back to the news, everybody. It is time to talk about Total War and all of the chaos that's happening. Quite a few things have happened. A number of people have leaked to me confirming statements made to other people, as well as a few new bits of information that I can share with you, including, unfortunately, another cancelled game. So there's all that to do. Then we've got to go into some statements from Sega, which, funny enough, will take us to Apache Parlor, because, yes, those somehow are actually going to be involved here. And then the whole meltdown that happened on the Steam forums. This has been an absolutely rough few days. The best we can hope is that this will actually cause some people to wake up and some change to actually happen. Change here is the theme just about everywhere. There's a lot of that going on, and today's sponsor, I think, will be especially interesting to the sorts of people who enjoy the Total War franchise. Ground.news/Bellular, where you can revolutionize how you get the news and support our channel. And my link gets you 30% off their Vantage plan. Ground are awesome. They ingest over 50,000 articles a day. They organize them by story and they break them down by all the different sources and how they're reporting on each topic. The political bias and the ownership lets you quickly compare all those headlines and know what's going on. And as a real shout out, this is timeline for the situation that's going on in Israel. And you can see the timeline is pretty damn amazing. I'll talk about that in a sec. Now, as you're obviously no doubt aware, there are terrible things going on in the Middle East right now. I mean, I can barely even mention that topic without this video getting flagged. And it, like with other flashpoints in the world, highlights all the weaknesses of our modern news environment, where misinformation can spread, deceptive image persuasion is extremely impactful. I mean, here's a little example. Take this topic. Really important, right? 66% right-leaning coverage across 59 sources. It's good to know that, and when you actually go in, you can see how all the different outlets are headlining. You can see all the spin, all the bias, and work out between all of that what is actually going on so that you are truly informed. And as for timeline, it is just amazingly useful for what's going on there right now, where you can just see all of the major stories and then work out how they're actually being covered. Ultimately, it's hard to trust one source. That's why I love Ground. They give me the features and the tools. And there's other great features like Blind Spot that just surfaces for you news from within your political blind spots. And their browser extension is pretty epic too. It brings their power all across the web. Like, what if you're reading a story and you're just a bit sus? You can open their extension and all the power of Ground will be brought to you right there, and you can immediately go and compare. It is really cool. Ground.news are more important than ever. You can get 30% off a Vantage plan at ground.news/Bellular. They're an awesome service. They've stuck with us throughout the year. Even when the CPMs on YouTube were in the gutter, it's been great to know that their support has been behind the channel. So thanks, Ground. Check them out, and let's get into the news. Right, rapid TLDR of the situation. Overall, Total War fans have been frustrated, right? We've been not happy over a variety of issues core to the franchise, such as the AI, to pick the most simple one. Then the historical side of the fan base, we're very hungry for a large scope title that's highly replayable, covers a very, very large span of time perhaps, such as a Medieval 3 or an Empire 2, something like that. Historical Total War fans are also rather split, and I think are rarely being fulfilled by the real-time battles that the franchise has become known for. For the likes of me, they are too fast-paced. There's more gamey elements that appeared in Three Kingdoms and Troy, and basically the Warscape engine has got issues that impact the real-time battle situation. And as much as firing up a mod like Divide et Impera is great on Rome 2, it would be nice if the core game didn't have to contend with these issues. And while on the historical front we have had the Sagas titles, broadly speaking, they've been really damn underwhelming and have absolutely suffered when it comes to replayability, as is very much evidenced in their Steam charts data. Now then, for the fantasy fans, they've not had the best time ever. Now, what Warhammer 3 overall achieves is quite magnificent, bringing the full old world, like over 90 factions, a hell of a lot of content, right? And having a big old slice of the old world being there is actually quite important in a world where, of course, Games Workshop did the whole End Times into Age of Sigmar thing. That said, they are returning to the fantasy setting now, which is quite nice. Also, and especially for the fantasy crowd, the games have become expensive in the sort of way that perhaps fans of The Sims or the big Paradox games will be aware of. There is in fact a past drama with Immortal Empires where to play Immortal Empires, you needed all 3 base games. Now, when Immortal Empires left beta, they did end up changing that because the community basically basically banded together and said, hey, this massive cost of entry is not going to help this franchise going forward. Now, Warhammer 3 itself has been a bit of a mess. It had a very buggy launch, and it had a core campaign design that basically was a really large miss, and I do actually have some leaks on how that came to be as well. Also, the DLC plan entered its new form. This is something that's happened this year. Bit of a TLDR here, so Lord packs seem to have increased in price to the price of a race pack. Here's an example. Shadows of Change, this is the one that really caused all the headlines. It's got, I think, 3 lords, 1 hero, and 11 units for $19.99. And as much as, say, the Changeling is pretty cool and unique, it fundamentally is not a humongous amount of content, but it is £19.99, I think about $25. That is the same price as the Chaos Dwarves race pack, which I believe was 3 legendary lords, a hero, and of course, 29 units, because it's the Chaos Dwarves, big pack. So, a lot of people are feeling stung by that they're essentially getting way less content and they're being asked to cough up more money for it. And then they had the statement from Rob Bartholomew that pretty much said, listen, guys, shit's expensive. That's just the way that things are. And this is the business reality of making this game. So people kind of realized oh, okay. Are they going to start squeezing us more and more now? Of course, the community then saw Hyenas, a very big, expensive game that basically got laughed at whenever it was unveiled because, come on, do we really need another one of those? That didn't seem to make much sense. Of course, we then find out that Hyenas is dead. A whole bunch of people leaked to Voland on that. And it's a pretty crazy situation because Hyenas actually is the most expensive Sega game ever. So while you have Rob Bartholomew talking about hey, these are just the tough business realities, people are then kind of looking at Hyenas and saying, hey, are we just the cash cow getting milked so that you can go and do something else? And then to whip us back to the land of historical Total War, yeah, Pharaoh is a pretty limited scope game. It does not have as much of say, Egypt that, there's also really thought. Yeah, it's mapped it'll do. And to be honest, Pharaoh, it's a fun enough game within its limited scope. The thing is, though, it is essentially a reskin of Troy. It is in everything but name a Sagas title, which is those smaller games like, say, Troy or Thrones of Britannia. And just the thing is, they dropped Sagas from its name and then they increased its price to that of a full historical Total War title. Also, Total War 3 Kingdoms sold really well, but it had a worse DLC attachment rate. I believe quite significantly because of the Chinese market, and it seemed that further work on that DLC was stopped early. There then was a promise of another game in that setting, and I've had leaks on that as well. Meanwhile, we see that Warhammer 3 Steam numbers are fairly weak, and we see that Pharaoh has actually launched to the lowest concurrent players of a Total War game on Steam ever, which is all pretty crazy. So, that's you basically caught up with the situation. Let's talk about some new things. First, I think I should talk about leaks. A number of people reached out to me, have been able to confirm that yes, this is Creative Assembly people who do have, knowledge of the matter, some of whom are not the people who leaked to other members of the press, right? So, I'll just get into things then. I've kind of split all the information that I've learned into a few categories. Number 1, DLC. Let's talk about DLC. It's a core pillar of their business model. Initially, it was a tiny team, 4 people in the days of Warhammer 1. This then swelled to a total of 80 team members, and by Warhammer 3, DLC basically was working with 2 teams of 40 developers. However, the developer who leaked to me said that basically, from their experience inside, this large increase in team size for the DLCs, it really didn't lead to the sorts of, content quality or quantity improvements that one would necessarily expect. And we'll get into the reasons why that is. And before we get into the reasons why, the leaker who went into the most depth about that said that because of their role in the company, it's not like they would have had a super top-down, view of all this, but from their experience actually working on this kind of thing, this is how it felt to them. Number 1, technical debt. This has been talked about by just about every leaker. So, the Warscape engine came to being in 2007. It powered 2009's Empire Total War. Over time, technical debt has mounted. And the problem is that core fixes to problems basically were never really folded into what you could see as like the core branch of the Warscape engine. This is because various different Total War games just branched off previous Total War games, meaning their codebase was just sort of vast and scattered about, though as has been mentioned by some other leakers, they are now making efforts to actually tie some of that together, but still it hasn't been ideal. Then we've got the problem of senior staff leaving. So allegedly over the last few years, quite a few senior staff have actually departed the company. Now, the developer said that they basically had to learn quite a lot of programming stuff, even though they were in a design job. And the reason why here is loads of these experienced staff left the company. Apparently, low comparative wages to what they could get elsewhere was one of the core reasons for that. But the problem is the company had an awful lack of documentation. So because this documentation didn't exist, it meant the newer people onto projects basically were not able to work efficiently. Now, when you think about the size of those DLC teams, and I mean, the person literally said, like, I feel like if you told people what the size of these DLC teams actually was, that they wouldn't believe you. So I thought that was quite telling. But basically, that's one of the major problems. You've got a bad engine, bad tools, which we'll get into in a little bit, but the expertise in the documentation isn't there to let the new staff get up to speed, which basically means you're going nowhere fast, and in an environment where there's just bugs aplenty, yeah, you can see that this is all really bad. And to cap off the technical debt side, basically lots of new people being thrown into a situation with a lot of tech debt, and that also just not leading to good productivity. Now, tools. Tools are extremely important. I mean, come on, if you've got to do a job and you've got bad tools, be this physical, be this digital, we all know that absolutely sucks. In-game development tools are extremely important, and one of the reasons why you'll see loads of studios actually want to perhaps move over to Unreal or Unity or something like that is because of their editor, because of the ease of developing tools that will plug into that editor to enable their designers to make content efficiently. So in this case, a lot of content in these games is actually implemented in XML via an internal tool that I think it's called Dave, an internal tool called Dave that generally speaking is terrible, especially in how, like, not only is it just very clunky to use and old, but it doesn't have much in the way of inbuilt error checking. And here I can just go to a quote. For example, to add a new incident, which is like a random event, a designer must navigate through 6 different tables, add a large variety of specific tags to the incident. Missing one of those tags will cause the incident to fail silently in-game with little in the way of assets or debugging information. Now, this is extremely important to call out. So, see if you're like coding, right? You've got a project open, a Visual Studio, you try to run it, something breaks. Well, what you can do is you can start, setting your breakpoints, and you can actually work out, okay, what line am I running into an issue? And then you can start to diagnose that, right? The most dangerous thing is a bug that doesn't report correctly. A bug that just kind of slips by, the behavior you expect doesn't happen, but you've got no firm way of really understanding. Then you're left having to do very manual, annoying things. As an example, that tool Dave not having good error checking tools. Even an accidental, typo or something like that perhaps would be called up as like a major error. It seems that stuff like that was not necessarily happening with this in-house tool. This is really one of the major downsides of in-house engines, and when you kind of hear about very large productions or content teams struggling with in-house engines, a lot of this stuff is kind of what you hear really across the industry. To go back to the quote, this means that the designer would often have to load the game numerous times, each time taking over 5 minutes in debug builds, before he could be sure the incident worked correctly. This process normally took around 2 hours. Yeah, when you're just fighting loading bars at work, or stuff like that. And the most annoying part of that, in my opinion anyway, is it breaks the flow state, right? It's just a straight interruption to what you're doing. And that really is cognitively damaging to the employee's ability to actually work. So even from a top-down sort of managerial perspective, what you want is a work environment where flow is respected and not broken. If you have big issues like this, that obviously is, that absolutely sucks. Now, I'm not going to say what this developer's new job is, but they compared a sort of a similar, situation, right? A similar type of work, type of piece of content to be implemented. And they spoke of how ludicrously faster it is at their new job than it would have been at Creative Assembly using the Total War toolset. The next problem then is QA, quality assurance. Little to no automated testing knowledge is present in the company. Now, this is absurdly important when you are working in games with this many moving parts at that level of scale. What automated testing does is just loads of drudge work. It just handles that shit. The server whirs up, things happen, and you get to find out what the problems are. A good friend of mine who works at a AAA studio, it's a AAA that has a particularly strong automated testing system that is in place for their live game. I believe some of that may be shared at some point in the future. It's the sort of thing like the Tech Hat enemy, like I hear about, I'm like, whoa, that is god tier awesome. But the point there is, a whole bunch of this testing gets automated. This is really, really important for development. It means you just find more bugs, more things actually get flagged and sorted out before your game comes out. And that's really major, because if you're just accruing little unknown bugs here, there, and everywhere, as time goes on, you're going to run into problems. There is another major problem with this though, and this is one that a lot of players will feel very directly. I mean, this is what was said to me by the developer. The QA staff basically have to spend loads of time on very basic stuff that absolutely should be automated, right? In other studios that are kind of operating at that scale, that would actually be automated. And because QA's time is being eaten up by a lot of that stuff, they're basically not able to, try to break the game in all of the creative ways that, of course, a player will naturally do as they're playing, meaning that a lot of the time, bugs are found on the Steam forum. In addition to this, there is a significant lack of documentation for QA. Documentation is extremely important for knowing how things work, how to steps to reproduce issues, that sort of thing, best practices, all these things save time, increase efficiency, very important, and are not particularly great at Creative Assembly. And also an issue of there being no one designer having a good sense of overall game-wide balance, leading to balance problems and power creep. Next then, on the topic of the patch cycle, this is an interesting one where you can actually see how it has developed. So, essentially, the patch cycle was extremely antiquated, and that is the reason why, for the longest time, patches would be really slow. Right now, they are kind of slow, but one thing that has happened since 4.0 is quite a few hotfixes, and apparently, these hotfixes are a part of some newer processes, like newer tools, whatever, that they've been able to develop at the company to let them do this kind of thing. Next then, Chaos Dwarves. This is an interesting one that I think will be quite worrisome to people. So, allegedly, Chaos Dwarves was not a profitable DLC. However, the person who spoke to me said that they're not sure if when this was said, this was Creative Assembly saying, oh, it flat out was not profitable, it did not hit its return on investment, or if it was them just saying that relative to their expectations, it did not perform as well as they thought. And this is where I basically say, as a sort of personal note here, you can make a profit, but the opportunity cost of making that profit could mean that you're at a loss compared to the expected return of using that budget, allocating that budget to another project. And basically, opportunity cost, I think, is one of the most important things for consumers to learn, because it really does explain a lot of the sort of planning decisions that are made with these products, especially when they feel just to us, where we're like, hey, you can make that and we totally buy it. Why don't you make it? Often it ends up being opportunity cost that is the reason. At the very least, though, they're trying to fix up some unit economics here, because I was told that Shadows of Change was allegedly under half the development time of Chaos Dwarves. Of course, Shadows of Change is also the same price as Chaos Dwarves, so you can see a very clear desire here to actually get their unit economics in better in a better state. So if you're talking about half the time, I mean, you can easily see half the time, same price, and being real, you still do have a captive audience, because that specific little brand of Warhammer you're not going to be able to get anywhere else in a game like that. So yeah. Okay, let's talk about leadership at the company. This is a fairly interesting one where I heard tales of frustration over just senior leadership being a little bit, kind of burying their heads in the sand. I was told that they were saying in a sort of internal presentation that Thrones of Britannia was a critical success by the players. And this is because Steam's recent reviews, which of course are the ones in the last 30 days, were were very positive, I believe, for the game. But of course, the reality is that game has 10,000 overall reviews and it's coming in as 65%. The dev said that they think this could maybe be for morale, but it also could demonstrate a bit of a willingness to look the other way, and I think the latter there is certainly felt by customers. The next topic then is Metascore. This is fairly interesting. So, allegedly, there was a document circling around the company from someone called Mike Simpson, who is like the overall creative director. And in this doc, he talks about how the time needed to turn a Metacritic rating of 80 into, say, a 90 is around a year, and how it's basically never actually worth doing that. Now, the developer then noted that Shogun 2 is a game that did get the time that it needed, and of course, Shogun 2 is one of the greatest games in the whole franchise's history, right? Be it Fall of the Samurai or a base game, I love them both to death. And I suppose on a personal note here, let's think about that. I mean, we've had many, many rough launches. I remember around the time of Rome Total War, there was people even talking about how they were, kind of ranking their priorities based on Metacritic. This is me reaching back to 2013, 2012, whatever in my memory, so I might be a bit hazy in that. But I think we do actually feel that. If they're saying that, hey, this just isn't worth the time, turning an 80 into a 90, but ultimately, that has led to loads of absolutely scuffed launches at the company that have damaged them. And I don't think they appreciate just how much their success is because they have a captive audience, because Paradox have not decided to take on big real-time battles. And I suppose, as a bit of a grumpy historical Total War fan, I would basically say that Warhammer has saved their ass, because they've been able to paint over their absolute core problems with the actual game systems. They've just been able to paint over that with gimmicks, like big single entity units, and some of those campaign quirks that various factions have. Again, that's just me being a grumpy historical player, and I do kind of like having some more unique faction mechanics. That is cool, but I think we've very much been sort of dancing around the issue for years of the very core of combat in the Warscape engine, and that's a problem because that's kind of their unique selling point. Okay, the topic of Warhammer 3. So Warhammer 3 is a game that, in my primary dev source's opinion, really did fail on its misguided design more than anything else. Allegedly, the game director of the title was told by just about everybody that the Realms of Chaos map and the focus on the rifts, that this basically was not a good direction to go in. In a post-mortem, the company then allegedly concluded that their directors needed more training. Now, it's one of those things, it's very easy for us to say that something's a bad idea in hindsight. The thing is, though, what happens when people before the fact internally were trying to flag up the issues and were not actually listened to? So yeah, that's rather unfortunate. The campaign that they launched Warhammer 3 with just wasn't really... It's why does it even exist? It's one of those bizarre things. What people really wanted was Immortal Empires anyway. But hey, I did like the Vortex. I like the Vortex map in Warhammer 2. It's just, yeah, I don't know. Realms of Chaos, all the rifts, didn't work out. Next then, Three Kingdoms. So there was drama over Three Kingdoms, right? Where it very much seemed the DLC plans were just axed a little bit early, and that was done in favor of a sequel, some sort of follow-up title, right? Now they said in 2021 in a video that's like a video and I think a blog post that's now rather infamous, that there would be a new game, right? In the Three Kingdoms sort of sub-franchise, that they would continue their Romance era games. For a lot of us, basically it seemed like the reason why is they didn't have good DLC sales, but they did have franchise-breaking records for the sales of that game. Well, apparently that game, the follow-up to it, has been cancelled as of early 2022. Apparently it was a mess, and there were concerns over the Chinese market as well. So overall then, that's a bunch of leaks. What are my thoughts? Well, basically, over the course of the last few days, I have heard from a number of Creative Assembly affiliated individuals. They do corroborate what Voland was saying. I haven't discussed much about the Rob Bartholomew and the 40% reduction in force. We will get onto that quite shortly, though, because I do think something along those lines is actually going to happen. But big picture, what I've been hearing matches what some sources have said to other members of the press. It does seem that the shoe kind of fits. It all passes muster. And I do think that this fundamentally is what is going on. I think it's a company that's being very risk averse. Rather than say Sega absolutely coming down and smashing them all the time, I have a suspicion that they always felt that Sega could kill them at any moment. And maybe that is what led to the very conservative decision-making around this franchise. Very much, well, our numbers peak at 2 to 3 million sales. We just need to squeeze as much money out of people as we can. Whereas a lot of people would sort of think like, yeah, but if you're only following old numbers, you'll never be a leader. You'll never be a visionary. That will never lead to the sort of thinking that gets you a franchise like Warhammer existing in the first place. And I think to so many fans, they then see, 70 million going into Hyenas being a total wash, and kind of thinking like, yeah, you're saying all this stuff about like money and Total War, but you're happy to go and do that. What the hell are you thinking? Now, let's talk about Sega Sammy Holdings Limited. Right, Sega Sammy Holdings. On the 28th of September, they posted a notice. It was called Notice Regarding Implementation of Structural Reforms in the Consumer Area, brackets, Entertainment Contents Business. And for me and my team, something like that is actually a real page turner. I'm going to read section 2 for you. We will implement reduction of various fixed expenses at several group companies in the relevant region centered on Creative Assembly Limited. We expect to incur one-time expenses related to reduction of fixed expenses. We will continue to consider measures to improve profitability in European bases apart from the above. That's quite fun, isn't it? So, Connor, who leads news research for me, kind of like linked that back and then linked it with another banger that he remembered. Because Sega's not just Sega, it is Sega Sammy Holdings. Sammy are doing interesting things. So get load of this, right? This is a headline from earlier on in the year. Quote, Japan Sega Sammy Holdings sees profits soar in fiscal 23 as pachinko integrated resort segments show strength. Now, when I go back to that notice from the 28th of September, in addition, the Pachi slot and pachinko machine business continues to perform well, centered on the Pachi slot machines, and in the resort business, occupancy at various facilities is continuing to be solid. So, in section 2, they talked about reducing Creative Assembly. Later on in the same document, they talk up their resort business and their pachinko business, right? Total War is competing with literal gambling. And ultimately, Sega Sammy Holdings is going to be a fairly cold business at the end of the day. So those allegations from Voland and his sources, I believe one person said that to him, then he was able to confirm that with multiple other people at the company. But they are regarding the firing of Rob Bartholomew, who was one of the heads at the brand department that allegedly is quite responsible for a lot of the direction of the franchise in recent years. That and the leak of a 40% reduction in force, those certainly are interesting. Now, those have not been announced yet in public. However, given this notice where they say they're going to be, doing a reduction of fixed expenses at several group companies, centered on Creative Assembly, that does feel like, yes, layoffs are very, very likely. Obviously, 40% would be rough, especially if that is targeting more experienced people at the studio. We already know that in terms of more experienced people, they've been struggling, right? They've lost a lot of experienced staff because of low wages. That has in turn made their lack of documentation worse, damaged a lot of their development. But yeah, you would hope it's not targeted at the more senior people. As an example, it kind of was at BioWare lately, and it seems they're going to struggle from that. Then, of course, the topic of the forums. Look, I want to keep time in mind here, and I know this has been covered by multiple other people, like Voland, Great Book of Grudges, Legend of Total War, they've all spoke to this. Essentially, Steam forums got really, really, really messy. CA started swinging that ban hammer, and in some cases, yes, reasonable bans. In other cases, not reasonable bans, right? Just a big old community management disaster. Then, trying to clarify the situation, they made a post about what is and is not okay, and that post ended with, the right to discuss is a privilege. It is not an entitlement you earn by playing the game. And the broad post that they put out that included that at the end, it was one of those posts that talked around the issue, right? So it was talking around the issue. It wasn't actually engaging with the stuff that people were really interested in. The wording was also too broad. It kind of felt like the teacher getting angry and trying to quiet down the classroom and scolding people. So that did not go down well, which led to another explosion in people being unhappy at CA. Then an apology was posted from their head of the community. And basically, here's the thing, right? Being a guy in the community team, it's kind of tricky because there's feck all he can really say of value. Because, like, think about it. He's not going to be able to talk about the engine, which he later would sort of say in a comment, but he's not going to be able to talk about the engine, really, or the pricing, or any of these things. Like, there's so little that he can actually talk about, and I'll sort of explain why in a little bit. Now, this staffer then continued to respond to people in the comments, trying to be kind of more introspective and non-combative, really trying to do a shift in tone from the previous post and situation that they found themselves in. But of course, for a lot of readers, none of this is feeling authentic because they've really just felt silence. Right? Silence for a very long time while they have had issues. And that's the thing, there have been problems for a long time, and CA have always seemed to just duck behind the ramparts and wait for it to blow over. It seems that that's always been their strategy. And ultimately what I've kind of realized here, CA is good at community marketing, right? So I think they're pretty good at making the social media videos. They're pretty good at, engaging with the various historical channels. It's like, hey, you don't need to like Pharaoh to think the latest Invicta video talking about the Hittites is a cool video, because we all love history. That's kind of why we're here. So they're good at that. But the thing is, community marketing is really not going to do them any good now, because they're doing community marketing to a community that is no longer receptive. And that highlights what has been their real weakness, which is true, authentic community engagement. Those are very different things, and ultimately they've kind of failed on that. Now, I of course am very aware of another company that has that has had struggles with the community, that being, of course, Blizzard Entertainment. I can certainly say when it comes down to the actual community managers of that company, they're pretty much always really legit. I've never really had a problem, and I'm definitely one of the more critical, one of the more willing to be sort of pissed off at things people, in that space. And as of late, they've done a way better job of developers actually explaining things and actually fixing problems promptly. It's quite funny then to see Creative Assembly. It's like I'm just sort of seeing a repeat of things I've seen before, just that CA have not got a handle on it. As we move to the future then, obviously Warhammer 3 was rocky. The pace of DLC really fell below what people had been expecting, right? And putting things together, and of course there was a video from Rich on their team back earlier this year, where they talked about how getting Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires working ate up a lot of time. That is very much backed up by my sources. I believe the quote is that the Warscape engine is crumbling under the weight of Warhammer 3. That's what I was told. And in that video from Rich, he refers to the DLC that we would then know as the Chaos Dwarves, as well as a DLC in summer and a DLC in winter. Now, summer would, of course, be Shadows of Change. Right now, though, we don't know what that winter DLC is, or if it will even happen, and there are still pending questions over, incoming updates to the game. And that, I think, leads to the final fear for this segment of the fan base. As an example, if one of my sources there is correct in Chaos Dwarves either being a financial failure or being seen as a financial failure, and then the Shadows of Change has caused this much damage to them, and thinking about what Sega themselves have said, and what Rob said in his post about the business model, should people actually be worried about the viability of Warhammer Total War 3, right? Should they be worried about that? After all, 3K had really big sales, then it didn't have a great attach rate, then it seemed that some future DLC was canned, then the future game seemingly has been cancelled. Are people perhaps worried that they're just kind of going to move on from Warhammer 3? I know there's been people talking about the idea of a 40k or something like that, which, hey, if there's a 40k, I'm absolutely down. I love the 40k setting, but, still, it feels like this should be a Paradox-style game that is just supported for a very, very long time indeed. But right now, that balance is not there. And with Shadows of Change, if you're literally trying to have under half the development time for the same amount of money as a race pack, people are rejecting that. That's bad, right? That's bad for the long run. And even if they saw sort of more profitability or whatever from Shadows of Change, if you even look at the reviews for Shadows of Change, they are really negative. And there's a lot of people saying, look, I only bought it because of this one thing, but I'm not happy and I kind of feel screwed. That damage will increase their churn rate. And I know this is not a SaaS business, and we don't have some sort of SaaS business model where we're going to compute all of our, lifetime values and shit, but absolutely, the more you piss off your customers, the lower their lifetime value will be. So you really cannot afford to do that. Ultimately, then, my feeling is just, look, numbers follow numbers. If you are always a follower, then you will never really be an industry-leading visionary, an innovator. Hitting a 90 is worth it, because an attitude of hitting 90 not being worth it when you could just ship 80 instead, given all the bugs, given all the problems, that is what leads to Rome 2 style launches being something that is seen to be okay. And look, what if Warhammer 3 actually had a good launch? What if it wasn't a total mess? What if people in the company were actually listened to when they said that the Realms of Chaos and all the rifts and stuff wasn't really working out for the quality of the game? You know, what if it wasn't such a mammoth effort getting Immortal Empires going, because they were, you know, developing the game reasonably and actually focusing on their tools instead of just getting product out. I would say you'd have a better game, a happier audience, a more reasonable DLC cadence, you wouldn't have churned through so many people, and people would have a bit more faith in the company. Ultimately, the trouble here is this is the sort of thing where long-term decisions should be made, and I suppose people's worry is that this being a non-privately owned company, this is a studio that is owned by Sega. Look, if Sega are just living to the quarterly beat of the drum, then maybe the people at Creative Assembly don't even feel like they can prioritize longer-term numbers because they feel they're always scrambling to have a Total War something every single year with all of the DLCs, because that's what they feel they need to do to just hit the quarterly, you know, target. Because if they don't, oh, we'll see blog posts. We'll see blog posts like that, you know, that notice from Sega Sammy about reducing fixed expenses, particularly at Creative Assembly, which, you know, is going to mean job losses. Ultimately, then, that is the situation. Thank you to the people who've reached out. I absolutely need to get back to your emails. I'm preparing for a trip, so I'm flying out like tomorrow. Yeah, I'll draft emails on the plane. If you want to support our channel and also get access to an awesome tool, you've got to check out Ground News at ground.news/Bellular in that link down below. They are very, very awesome, especially given all the things that are going on planet Earth right now, where, yeah, you just can't trust the first thing that appears. You want to be able to actually see what's going on. So check out Ground. Thanks to them for sponsoring. Thanks to you for watching. And let's hope that this forces some introspection, some thought, and that ultimately this period leads to a better future for the Total War franchise.